All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Henney with Project Q Atlanta, and thank you for joining us today for the first installment of Q Conversations. We're a little late to the live virtual game, but we are doing it now nonetheless. And I want to thank everybody for joining me to talk about Georgia's upcoming primary, which is Tuesday, and LGBT equality and candidates and how that can factor into Tuesday's voting. So, with that said, I want to introduce our panelists, and then we'll just jump right into to some questions. So there's Jeff Graham, who's the Executive Director of Georgia Equality and a longtime advocate on LGBT and HIV issues, going all the way back to when he was a college student. And Jeff, I won't say when that was, so I'll just let people guess. Kenyatta Mitchell is also joining us. She is the chair of the Georgia Equality Inc. board and is a principal in the Atlanta office of Paramount Consulting Group, and has worked on lots of policy issues and spent time with our lawmakers down at the state capitol. Thanks for joining us. And also is Fred Smith, who's an associate professor at Emory University School of Law, and also serves on the LGBT advisory board for the mayor, Mayor Bottoms at Atlanta, and is also on the board of Lambda Legal. So thank you everyone for joining us. And if any attendees have questions, there's a chat to your right on the screen. My business partner, Mike Fleming with Project Q, is there to help moderate that. And if you have any questions down at the bottom, there's an ask a question option to type your question in, and we'll get to those towards the end of the event. And then finally, there is a poll, if you'd like to take it, about voting and whether you have already voted in the June 9th primary, and how you've done that. So we will do that, and the poll is also at the bottom of the screen. So we'll just jump in and get started. So, and this question is sort of for any of the three of you, with everything that's been going on, the week of protests and unrest calling for justice and equality. Voting for progressive candidates is concrete action that people can take on Tuesday if they haven't already. But how do you tell people, how do you address people or respond to folks who might say, voting is great, but it really hasn't brought me any change in the past, and it's not something that necessarily provides the immediate change that they're looking for? I don't know if any of the three of you want to tackle that question.
I think it's and rather than or, right? So in these moments, it matters who is in leadership. As we're looking across the country and we're seeing these protests and we're seeing various demands, it matters whether or not you have someone who has the courage and has the value set that matches the moment, right? Who maybe they need the pushing that happens as a result of the movement. But folks who, rather than resist the movement, take those movements as an opportunity for change. And so it is the case that voting alone is insufficient. People have to keep pushing, every politician, even those you agree with. And it's also the case, however, that the pushing without folks in place who can kind of move the ball forward is also, in my view, insufficient. People died for the right to vote, and people, were beaten in the head, like John Lewis, for the right to vote. It's important to match the movement to our politics.
If I can add to that, so there's also consistency. Many times marginalized groups and groups that younger people will vote for the president and not vote down ballot. When you think about what happened in Brunswick, that is a DA. So DA is a down ballot race. You go into judges. You go into all of these races that people don't pay as much attention to. So a lot of folks said things that Obama didn't do. Obama was there for 8 years. We've had, 400 years of oppression in this country. Actually longer than that when you look about our native folks and indigenous people. So you cannot erase hundreds of years of oppression of marginalized groups in 8 years, and nor can one person to do it. So you really have to vote up and down ballot, and you also have to vote consistently. Every race is important.
Thank you. Jeff, anything from you on that?
I don't have anything to add. I think both Fred and Kenyatta really handled it. Thanks.
Okay. And Jeff, so recently, Georgia Equality, I think you've done 2 batches of endorsements. One batch was legislative races for the state house and state senate, and then there was another batch more recently that was local races, judicial races, and municipalities. Can you talk a little bit, either one of you, Jeff or Kenyatta, talk a little bit about how you approach that endorsement process?
Sure, I'll be happy to talk a little bit about it, and then Kenyatta, if you have anything to add to that. So we actually did 3 sets of endorsements this time out. So first was back in December. It was actually late November, early December, that we wanted to make a statement that our top priority going into the 2020 election season was to defend the open LGBT incumbent members of the legislature. So the 5 open members, right now, we only have members in the House. Those 5 received an early endorsement from us in December. In addition to that, there were 2 seats that we knew were going to be open seats. And in those instances, that was Senate District 41. We endorsed Kim Jackson, and then in House District 99, Marvin Lim up in Gwinnett County. So Kim is out in DeKalb, the Stone Mountain area. Marvin is up in Gwinnett County. Because those were open seats without an incumbent in that race, with open LGBT candidates that we had been working with for several months already. We knew them well, so we endorsed 7 folks in December. Then yes, after qualifying towards the end of March, very early in April was when we looked at the state races, and then we did municipal races there. Our process is a little bit different than a lot of organizations. We're actually proactive. We sent out surveys. I don't know the exact number, but I think it was in the neighborhood of about 300 candidates total, both Republicans and Democrats, as well as in nonpartisan races as well. We had about 70 so candidates that did return surveys, and then the board going through a process that really looks at each race independently, looking at their stance on LGBT issues, their ability to get endorsements and support from other organizations, as well as their ability to raise funds. Because frankly, as much as I hate to say it, it is a reality of most races that you can have a really great candidate, but if they have not raised any money, they're probably not going to win their race. And so we take all of that into consideration and then issue the endorsements. We will be doing a similar process in August to get ready for the general elections in November, and we will be releasing another set of endorsements then.
And I think there's 16 candidates running for the state house and the state senate, which to me, in my memory, if it's not a record number, it's probably pretty high in terms of total number of candidates that are running. Is that excited to see that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very exciting to see that. And, I know one of the questions is, why don't we support all of the open LGBT candidates? And again, I think in some ways, in a perfect world, I kind of wish we could. Folks who are open LGBT, they usually get a bit of a nod and a step up, because certainly representation matters. And we've seen that with the difference that it has made, frankly, in the culture and the voting record of the House of Representatives to have 5 openly members there. That's why focusing on Kim Jackson's race in Senate District 41, frankly, is one of our top priorities, because it would be nice to have someone in the Senate as well. But unfortunately, Georgia Equality's mission is to pass legislation. So electing people to office is a strategy and a tool towards passing legislation and improving policies. So that's a marked difference from an organization like the Victory Fund. The Victory Fund's mission is to elect to office open LGBTQ candidates. And that may seem like a fine distinction, But one of the things that we take into account is if someone is running against an incumbent and the incumbent has a good voting record on our issues, if they have been someone who has supported our legislation in the past, frankly, if there's someone who has been leading on legislation or been very outspoken in their comments from the well, or been very supportive in committee hearings, all of those things have to get entered into the mix. Because frankly, as an organization that does work down at the Capitol, if folks that have supported our agenda and supported us as an organization, if they feel that we won't support them in their bid for re-election, if they've done nothing wrong, it can actually hurt our legitimacy as an organization down at the Capitol.
And Kenyatta, you work at the Capitol as well, and have experience working with governors, Georgia governors in the past. I think Jeff touched on this a little bit, but can you expand a little bit about how important it is to have LGBT voices down at the Capitol?
I mean, it's extraordinarily important. I mean, you think about the closed door. So when you get into the Democratic caucus meetings, you get into the Republican caucus meetings, that's where a lot of the businesses occurs. And lobbyists and folks like Jeff and I cannot go into those rooms. So having Black caucus members, having women's caucus members, et cetera, be able to look into the eyes of an LGBT person and say, I don't want to pass this legislation that's important to you, is a fundamentally different thing. So we think it's very important to have representation both on the ropes, out in the lobby, as well as behind closed doors when these decisions are truly being made. I mean, I like to really bring up Park Cannon and Sam Park, who both passed age legislation that had not been passed in the General Assembly for years. It was decriminalization legislation. Having two people in the House be able to push for that legislation is extremely important. So the more that we're able to get people, we would love to have a Republican House member that's out, that we can have behind closed doors and talk to folks. And as Jeff said, we're pushing for Kim Jackson, because to have a religious leader who is an out lesbian to be able to speak to our the things that are important to us is important.
And I think there is a Republican running for a state Senate seat.
Yeah.
Cody Smith, and I believe Georgia Equality endorsed him. Is that?
We did.
Okay. And Jeff, I think you touched on this a little bit, but so there are a handful of LGBT candidates that did not get an endorsement, and that's an issue that not necessarily every election cycle you have faced, but I know from covering on Project Q in the past, there have been races where that has happened. So what's I guess folks might ask, how does that happen? If it's an LGBT candidate, shouldn't they automatically get an endorsement? And how would you respond to that?
Yeah, and again, I mean, it's a very complicated situation. This is why frankly, as much as I will stand behind our endorsement process, I think a well-educated voter is going to look at how multiple organizations act and weigh a lot of information into their choice for who they're going to support in a specific race. So I will be the first to admit that as much as I appreciate people looking to Georgia Equality for leadership, and I will support our endorsement process, I also think if folks, if the major issue that people have on how they cast their vote is on someone's sexual orientation or gender identity, then they should do that, and they should look at the candidate that the Victory Fund has endorsed here in Georgia in those races. As I had said before, in some of the instances for open LGBT candidates, they were good on the issues, but they may have been challenging, and actually in an instance of several instances, they are actively challenging incumbents that have consistently co-sponsored our legislation and consistently voted for the positions that we have asked folks to vote in. And I would remind everyone that we are still in a legislative session. The legislative session will reconvene on June 15th. We will be depending upon some of those incumbents to continue to stand with us over the next 11 days. If we are to increase the revenue that we need to avoid some of the draconian cuts that are coming our way, if we need the support to pass Medicaid expansion, and if we need votes to look at hate crime legislation or other criminal justice reform efforts that may be coming forward that we would support. And all of that, unfortunately, gets entered into the mix.
Yeah. This is a good opportunity for some value added for me, because I can at least say the names of some of the candidates who are running against incumbents, or where there are multiple LGBT folks in the same race, or where there's an LGBT person running against an ally. So some of those folks include Devin Barrington Ward, who's running for the state Senate. This also includes Kelly Johnson, who's running for the state Senate. And then in District 56, there's Alex Wan and Kyle Lamont, who are two LGBT folks who are seeking that particular seat. And so those are races where, we're an organization, it might not make the best sense for them to do an endorsement, but where folks who are listening might be interested in who some of those candidates are as you're doing your research.
Yeah. Thanks, Fred.
And there are a couple of open LGBT candidates that are running in primaries where they don't have a challenger right now, but they are running against an incumbent in the fall. There may be more open LGBT candidates that we do endorse heading into the November election.
And Fred, when I filled out my ballot yesterday and dropped it off at the library, so I'm good to go for Tuesday. But one of the things I noticed that I was struck by was at least I'm in Fulton County, so there were a lot of judicial races in Fulton County, a chunk of them for Superior Court seats. And Georgia Equality has done some endorsements in some of those races. But in the same sense that Jeff and Kenyatta talked about the importance of having LGBT reps at the legislature, how is it important? How important is it for judicial seats to be either filled by LGBT candidates or to have an understanding of LGBT issues and equality?
Yeah, sure. It's important at the Superior Court level, which is the trial court level, for many reasons. One is that in some instances, when it comes to constitutional challenges of laws that might be on the books in Georgia that need to go, that's kind of the first place you go before it ever gets to the state Supreme Court. They're the people who build the record and who write the opinions that make their way up. It's also important because when it comes to various disputes, whether it be a family law dispute or whether it be even in the realm of criminal law, having someone who is not jaundiced by bias against LGBT folks, that's going to matter. That they care about our mutual humanity, that's going to matter. And so those races are absolutely important. And then kind of going up the line to Court of Appeals and the state Supreme Court, it matters there as well, both for all those reasons and also because on many instances that's the kind of where the rubber meets the road when it comes to constitutional challenges. So those are reasons why folks I think want to pay attention to the judicial races for sure. Okay.
And is there, in addition to Georgia Equality's endorsements in those races, Fred, do you know of places where people can, where there's a good resource for them to read up on judicial candidates?
Sure. So all the candidates have websites, so I would take a close look at those. I would seek the counsel of different types of lawyers, right? So if to the extent you know them. So if you know a criminal lawyer and a civil rights lawyer, I mean that's my approach. I try to, and that helps me kind of balance things out. Some LGBT politicians have engaged in endorsements. There's actually a split. And this isn't oppositional, by the way. I love Georgia Equality. I'm just trying to round it out. I know. So, for example, Park Cannon has endorsed Sharmila Williams for judge, and Georgia Equality has endorsed Judge Ryder, or sorry, not yet Judge Ryder, but Ryder. And so, those are places that might be a place where you kind of want to also look. So both to the Georgia Equality endorsements, and then also to other LGBT civil rights validators.
Okay, thank you. Kenyatta, you're an LGBT ally. You were involved with your work on Georgia Equality. You were involved in the endorsements. What Jeff talked about some of the things that how the endorsements unfold. How did you approach it as an ally? I think that you might look at candidates and LGBT issues maybe a little bit differently than say I would. And so I'm curious sort of how you approach that process.
So how I approach is who we think would be the most effective. I really want to echo what something that Jeff said earlier, which is it's extraordinarily important for us to have people who have been good to us, that we kind of repay that by saying, look, y'all have voted with us. You have been out there for us. We would like to support you. That is extraordinarily important that we do that. So in some of these endorsements where we did not endorse the LGBT person, it's extremely important that we endorse the person that has, effectively over years been with us on the issues. And that's how I come to make a decision about who we endorse is who is an effective legislator, particularly when they're legislators, who's an effective legislator, who's able to get their legislation passed, who's able to persuade people when we're unable to persuade them, or able to say that extra thing that we can't say. And, kind of the truth about what we do and the truth about politics is that you have to have enough money you have to have enough money on hand to wage an effective campaign. You could be, to echo Jeff again, you could be the best candidate in the world, but if no one knows it, then you don't want to, kind of double down on someone or something that would not be effective, for us during the session.
Okay, and any of the three of you, Mike was just asking or putting forward a question that was in the chat is how do you, is there certain ways you gauge effectiveness and how candidates or lawmakers can persuade their colleagues?
So for me, effective is, who do other legislators listen to when they go up to the well and speak? But we all know when I talk about going up to the well, when they address their colleagues on a piece of legislation, there are some folks who go up to address their colleagues on legislation who everyone continues doing what they're doing. So if they were reading a newspaper or on their phone or out in the hallway, when that person speaks, they go out and they do those things. There are some folks, when they go up to the well to speak, everyone runs to listen to them. We want to stand behind those people who people run to listen to. That's another little secret of being a lobbyist is you have to understand who are those decision makers, those true decision makers amongst decision makers, and those are the folks who really want to stand behind.
Okay.
And to me, when I think about effectiveness, I think about that, right? So I think about who do people listen to, who do people want to work with, who's able to actually transform an idea into meaningful legislation. But I also think about people who can just kind of transform the conversation. Folks, maybe and it may not always be the same folks, right? Right. And so you can have folks who are saying the things that us more careful people won't necessarily say, that dramatically move what the dialogue is about, and where that person's voice is still in everybody's head, even as they're talking about them behind closed doors. And so I like those folks too. I like the disruptors and the folks who we think of as more traditionally effective.
And to echo, sorry.
Go ahead, Kenyatta.
No, I was going to say, to echo what Fred said, is that we have some people who are the healthcare, subject matter experts in the General Assembly. So these are the people that when we have healthcare initiatives, everyone listens to them. There are certain people who are the public safety people, and then you have the religious leaders. So there's different people that we need to make sure have our talking points so we can amplify our voice. So it's very important that there may be a person who is a healthcare leader in the General Assembly who is very effective on spreading that message. We may not give them the talking points for our more social justice things, but for healthcare, they are there for us. So it's really dependent on a lot of different items. So go ahead, Jeff. I'm sorry.
Well, and I was, Fred, thank you both for that. But Fred, especially what you said, that yes, this shows how all of this is kind of a 3D chess game that's happening in real time all the time.
Yeah.
So one that I would add that I didn't hear either one of you talk about, that again, as someone who lobbies down at the Capitol a lot, effectiveness can also be the person that is texting me information. Did I hear this rumor?
Yes.
Someone that is accessible. Frankly, there are a couple of legislators that they will always call me or send an email and say, this piece of legislation just dropped.
Yep.
What can you tell me about it?
Yep.
And you know, there are 236 legislators. Most of the progressive folks who really share our values, address our agenda in meaningful ways, are in the minority party. And so, yes, there have to be many definitions of effectiveness. You know, ultimately, I think what we all like to think of is the person that can get things done, the person that can get a bill passed. But as both of you pointed out, there's a lot more to defining what effectiveness can be. And that can be representing your community, not just an LGBTQ community, but perhaps a segment of a district that has felt that they've not been well represented in the past, or a specific neighborhood, or other causes. Because let's just not miss the fact that LGBTQ folks do not live in an LGBTQ bubble. We have multiple identities, multiple interests, and multiple communities that we navigate through. And so part of what we try to do at Georgia Equality, and we do our best, and some folks are happy with it, and some folks are always unhappy with it, is to take all of that into account and endorse, or sometimes we will stay neutral in a race. I think staying neutral in a race is our way of saying that from a specific perspective of who can push our agenda, that there may be ultimately several good candidates that are well positioned to do that. And so we just feel that we cannot choose one over another.
And Jeff, that sounds like a perfect description of the approach that you might have taken in District 57, which is includes a large swath of Midtown, and there's two LGBT candidates in that race, and there's also a former state lawmaker who has a long history of supporting LGBT issues when she was at the Capitol. So with that race, is that sort of what you were getting out of it, because you didn't endorse that race?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely, Matt. I guess you kind of read my mind. You know, and I can't remember if you mentioned this. I know that Fred did earlier. There's also Kyle Lamont, an openly gay Black man from the southern end of the district. I don't live in the district, so I don't have a dog in that particular fight around who's best served to represent the district. Clearly, Alex and Stacey Evans both have very strong track records and history there. But I will also let you know I have heard from a number of folks from the southern end of the district, where frankly the majority of the voters live, expressing concerns that the majority of the district is Black, the majority of the district is in South Fulton, and there has been some frustration that their community, their needs never get the attention that the needs of Midtown and Morningside get. I've actually had this conversation with Stacey, with Alex, and with Kyle on why we would remain neutral in this race. The one thing that I want to assure everyone is that any of those three candidates will be amazing advocates for the LGBT community, and I think they will be strong, community-oriented advocates for the communities and the neighborhoods, not just in which they live. I think that, frankly, District 57 has a wealth of qualified candidates in this race, and ultimately only one person will win. I hope that the people who do not win will continue to seek office, because frankly, I would love to see all three of those folks in elected office here in Georgia at some level.
Agreed.
Thank you for addressing that, Jeff. And so, in this question, Fred or Kenyatta, so intersectionality has been an increasing focus of the movement for quite some time, and certainly this week has come back into sharp focus. And can you tell me, as a white gay male, how can I include issues of racial justice and women's issues as I look at candidates to vote, either now or later on in the fall?
I'll take a stab at it. So the term intersectionality is interesting because I think it has come to represent a lot of different ideas.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna first express what Kimberly Crenshaw, how she meant it when she articulated it in her articles in the late 1980s. And what she meant was that sometimes when you layer various identities on top of each other, that you get something that is kind of different than the sum of its parts, right? So there can be someone who maybe they don't discriminate against all Black people, right, as a general matter, and they don't discriminate against all women, but they really have it out for Black women, right? So when you put different types of identities together, then there can be kind of this sort of unique kind of discrimination, and that it's very important that both in the law and socially that we pay attention to that particular dynamic. And so moving forward, right, in terms of how do you take intersectionality and map it onto one's kind of political choices, I think it's about thinking about the moments where multiple identities leave someone in a particularly vulnerable spot, right? So, so just for an example, if someone is under-resourced financially, doesn't have healthcare, is African American, and they're gay, there's going to be certain healthcare needs that are going to kind of disproportionately affect that group. And you want to think about that and try to think about that when you're at the voting booth. What you were describing, Matt, when you said, there's how do I think about women's issues and how do I think about issues of racial justice? I think that the word intersectionality has come to start to mean that too. That is to say, it's not so much where do these identities come together, but how do we make sure that we're all taking care of each other? How do we make sure that we're thinking about vulnerable folks? And so one way to do that is to imagine yourself, if you're in a position of some privilege, to think about what would it mean, how would the most vulnerable person I can imagine, how would they vote, right? And that's going to look different in terms of how people's calculuses play out. But that might be one kind of lodestar that can help folks.
Thank you. So
I can say, as a Black woman who is straight, it's very interesting because who is in the model of being the oppressor and who is in the model of being oppressed can change, right? So as a black woman, I'm seen as kind of getting the short end of the stick, but I'm straight. So being able to understand that in different situations, in different places, in different ways, you may have privilege and you may not. I am absolutely privileged to be able to, my entire time that I've been married, and my husband and I have been together for 18 years, I've always been able to, one, marry him and also hold his hand in public and do other things that have been unthought of for many LGBTQ people, right? So that's a very privileged position. But, when I put on my other two hats of being a woman and of being an African American, that puts me in a place where I don't have as much privilege. So it's really being able to understand as you move through society and as you move through life, you put on one hat where you're privileged and you take off one hat where you're not, and understanding what that is and being very sensitive to people who are walking without that privilege at that particular time.
Thank you. That makes sense, and I appreciate that. We have reached sort of the end of our discussion, but we have a couple of questions. So I wanted to go into our Ask a Question piece there and throw those out here at the end. Let's see. So there's one for Rafer. I think we touched on this a little bit, but given our history of struggle and marginalization for representation and inclusion, how do LGBT organizations explain not supporting qualified openly LGBTQ candidates? Do they share their thresholds for endorsement or help open candidates to qualify? If not, should they? Jeff or Kenyatta, do you want to address that?
Yeah, if I can be very bold, it's that, we have folks in some of these races who are allies, who have been allies to us through thick and thin. It would be very disingenuous for us to say that you've been an ally for us for these years. We're going to say we want to endorse this person who on all other cases is very similar because they're LGBT. There are some cases where that may be a decision, but in some of these particular cases, it wasn't. We also have to look at viability. Look, incumbents have it's very difficult for an incumbent to lose in any situation. So, as an organization, it is very important that we move the agenda forward. And our agenda is, across our website. And I really hope that y'all can look at Georgia Equality's website, but it's extraordinarily important that our agenda moves. And it moves by knowing that we have folks who have supported us, know that we'll support them.
Okay, then we have one that, let's see. With voter suppression have been a major issue in the 2018 election. Do any of you have any advice or guidance on what immediate action that LGBTQ persons can do when they see it happening? What can a LGBT person say or do to address it immediately for it to stop on the spot?
Yeah, so we actually support the broader Georgia Election Protection Coalition. It's a lot of attorneys, the pro bono attorneys that volunteer their time with that. And so certainly anyone that sees voter suppression happening, anyone who experiences voter suppression yourself, call them immediately. Their phone number is 866-OUR-VOTE, 866-687-8683. So 866-OUR-VOTE. There's websites, certainly, always feel free to reach out to Georgia Equality. We do our best, believe it or not, to try to monitor social media feeds, especially on election day, to respond to folks. We will be pushing out this information, on Tuesday to help folks with that. It's not an LGBT specific group, but one of the reasons that we trust this group is, for instance, we always have great concerns around transgender, genderqueer, non-binary folks who may present an ID that does not align with their presentation that day at the polls, because there might not be the right gender marker. There may be a legal name which does not correspond with the name that the person is their preferred name. And we feel pretty good that election protection has actually addressed that issue internally, so that if someone calls and has a question about that, I would hope that they don't have another person on the end of the phone that's going to further stigmatize them. We've never heard of any problems with that. Certainly, again, if someone does have problems with that, let me know immediately so that I can get in touch with the folks at Election Protection. But that's going to be a good centralized source, regardless of your sexual orientation or gender identity, or even party affiliation. It really is there as a resource and tool for all voters in the state of Georgia.
Actually, I sort of have a question. I know I'm a panelist, but to the Georgia Democrats hotline, because that's what I was about to give before you gave that number. Do you have thoughts about that? Is that a number to give out to you, or?
I think that is perfectly fair to give that out as a number too. I will be honest with you. I try to give out nonpartisan information whenever possible, as opposed to those who wish. I think reporting it to the party that you identify with would also be fine. But I trust this as a more neutral source.
That makes sense. So as a partisan, the Georgia Democratic hotline number is 888-730-5816. And back to the nonpartisanship, another way to help with voter suppression is to donate resources or time to Stacey Abrams' organization, Fair Fight, because there's two different components. So your question kind of went to the immediate. What do you do in the immediate? And these hotline numbers help with that. Another version of that question is, what do we do with these kind of longer term fights who's going to be the plaintiff, who's going to be paying the legal bills as these cases make their way through the courts. And so Fair Fight and ACLU are organizations that kind of are often at the front lines there.
And there's another question that came in. This question came in through the Facebook event invitation, and it's about one of the Supreme Court races, Georgia Supreme Court races, and they were just wanted to know if there's anything from Justice Warren, the incumbent, their record of opinions, or anything on the opponent, I think it's Moran's, anywhere that people can go to look for resources to investigate those candidates in that race.
It's interesting. Yeah, so I'm not aware of any just kind of very clear-cut LGBT issues that have made their way to the state Supreme Court since Justice Warren has been there. She's been there a couple of years. And her background is that she was the state solicitor general for the state of Georgia. And in that role, typically, regardless of one's own personal views, you represent the laws of the state, which is what she did. She's a Duke Law grad and certainly supremely qualified and smart. But on the specific question of whether or not there's been any legal issues that have made their way to the court since she's been there that are specifically about LGBT issues, I can't personally think of any.
Okay, thanks, Fred. And then one last question. This came from the chat. Are there any Fulton County races which are not addressed by Georgia Equality's endorsements, for which the panelists have strong feelings for, against incumbents or challengers based on LGBTQ issues?
I do want to put in a little plug for Devin Barrington Ward in particular, and I think Kelly Johnson is wonderful as well. Devin is a fighter. He's kind of been, as a lobbyist, he's been at the front lines. He's been in this most recent fight over the last week. He's been at the front lines, leading marches, and he's a very. I think we do well to elect him. So I have strong views about that race. Another race that I have strong views about, where Georgia Equality did endorse, is Josh McNair in District 56. So I want to put in a special plug. He's brilliant, he's thoughtful, he's going to be the type of person who can work with legislators from all sides. I think he also will be the type of person who people will listen to when they're in the well. And then finally, someone who Georgia Equality has gone all in for it. And I have too. I've hosted a fundraiser for her. I think she's wonderful, and that's Kim Jackson. And I think she could really help to shape the dialogue in a really meaningful way at the state capitol. But we have a wealth of wonderful candidates. I'm excited about it, and thank you so much, Georgia Equality, for your role in pushing many of these candidates forward.
And Kelly Johnson is State Senate District 35, and Devin Barrington Ward is the Senate District 38. Just for some background info.
There is a resource on our website on the elections page there, and I know that the question was specific around Fulton County. This actually is a more universal answer. This year, Georgia Equality participated with an organization, Georgians Informed on Justice, and so this is mostly around criminal justice reform issues, and where sheriff, DA, solicitor, and prosecutors, candidates from around the state. It's a voter guide. So there was a list of questions that were asked of candidates across the state. You can find the link to that on our website, and you can go there and search it by county to see how different candidates have responded. Now, that's not the be all and end all, because I will let you know that in many races, there are folks that kind of have green checks across the board, but that would at least give you an idea if there is someone running in one of these county level races that we have not endorsed in that has perhaps bad positions on issues. The two LGBT questions that were asked for sheriffs, it was specifically around their treatment of transgender detainees and making sure that detainees have access to the medical care that they need as transgender individuals. And for DAs and prosecutors, the question was, would they voluntarily stop prosecutions under Georgia's current HIV criminalization statute until we can get a chance to change that law. We came very close of changing it this year. I mean, technically, we still have another chance. I don't believe that the legislature is going to be paying much attention to any issues other than the budget and perhaps hate crime legislation. But we are asking prosecutors and DAs across the state to voluntarily stop prosecuting people living with HIV under these antiquated and just anti-science laws.
Okay, thank you. And we have reached the end of our time. So I want to say special thanks to Fred and Kenyatta and Jeff for their time on this Friday afternoon, and I appreciate you joining us. And thank you to everybody that attended. We'll have an email will go out that'll have a link to a replay of the event if folks want to see that, or if they registered and weren't able to attend the last session. So thank you to everyone, and good luck with voting, and have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.